People ask me if I still love the smell of detergent after 30 years behind a machine. I tell them I love the sound of a dryer that's paid for. My name is Martha Sullivan. I've spent 3 decades wrestling with king-sized fitted sheets in Queens, not for me, but for my Grace. Grace was a librarian who found magic in books, until Julian Sterling walked into her life. When they married at their massive Greenwich estate, I thought I'd finally caught the bus I'd been chasing my whole life. I believed the Sterlings when they said, "Family takes care of family." How wrong I was. The Tuesday calls at 4:17 p.m. used to last 45 minutes. Slowly, they withered to a silence that felt thick and managed. Her voice started sounding like dried paper, thin, flat, and terrified. Eleanor Sterling wasn't just locking my daughter away. She was purifying her through a structured nutrition program that was nothing more than systematic starvation. And Julian, my son-in-law, stood by in his charcoal overcoat, watching his wife vanish. When I confronted him, he just checked his platinum watch, waiting for me to leave while he knew exactly what was happening in that basement. Then I remembered the gold bag. Grace knew I saved every scrap of paper she ever touched. I ran to the kitchen and pulled out the gift bag from last Christmas. Beneath the crinkle of the gold tissue paper, she had planted a time capsule. Tucked at the very bottom was a map out of hell in her real handwriting. "Mom, if I stop calling, look for the sanctuary. It's in the basement." That was the moment I found my strength. I looked at her graduation photo and made a vow to the woman who stole my child's life. "Eleanor, if you trapped my daughter in a hell you call a sanctuary, I will be the one who ensures you face the exact same judgment." Before we go any further, please hit subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. If you give this a like, good luck is coming your way. Eleanor mocked my unwashed hands. But these hands have operated industrial machines for years, and I know the systems behind the systems. The Sterling estate is a fortress, but I found the flaw. The laundry chute on the north wall is exactly 18 inches wide. It's just enough for a mother who has nothing left to lose. Eleanor, the light is finally coming on. The machines never stopped. That was the thing about running a laundromat: the drum tumbling, the water rushing, the spin cycle. Screaming its high, mechanical whine, it filled the silences in a way that used to comfort Martha Sullivan, and now, in the thick of a gray November Tuesday, felt like the only company she had left. The Sullivan Wash and Fold occupied the corner of a block in Queens that had been slowly gentrifying for 20 years without ever quite arriving. The brick was old, the neon sign in the window missing the A in laundromat since 2019. And the linoleum floor had a crack running from the second dryer on the left all the way to the bathroom door that Martha kept meaning to fix. She never fixed it. There were always more pressing things. She was folding someone's king-sized fitted sheet, the most stubborn object in the known universe, when the envelope caught her eye. It had been sitting on top of the register for 2 days, underneath a box of dryer sheets and a coupon circular. And she had been avoiding it with the particular determination of a woman who already knew what was inside. She set down the sheet, picked up the envelope. The return address was from her 401k administrator, a company name she'd chosen 22 years ago. When the financial advisor at her bank had spread out 3 brochures and said, "For someone in your position, Mrs. Sullivan, this one offers the most flexibility," she had nodded, signed, and gone back to folding other people's clothes. The penalty notice was printed in a businesslike font that seemed almost apologetic. Early withdrawal, tax liability, processing fee. The numbers arranged themselves into a sum that sat at the bottom of the page like a verdict: $4,200 deducted. $11,600 remaining. Martha read it twice. Then she set it on the folding table, very carefully, as though it might break. The financial help Eleanor promised. That was what Grace had called it, back in the spring. When Julian and his mother had offered to consolidate Martha's accounts as a gesture of family generosity. Eleanor Sterling had sat in this very laundromat, or rather, had stood in the doorway of it. Unwilling to enter, her cashmere coat held slightly away from the machines and said, "We want to make sure you're taken care of, Martha. Family takes care of family." Martha had been so grateful. That was what shamed her now. She had been so goddamn grateful. The penalty notice wasn't a gift. It was a record of a predatory loan she hadn't fully understood. She was signing the kind of financial instrument that someone with a lawyer in the room would have recognized immediately and refused. Martha Sullivan did not have a lawyer in the room. She had had Julian Sterling's warm handshake and Eleanor's thin, satisfied smile. She folded the notice in half, put it in her apron pocket. The drum kept turning. The phone rang at 4:17 p.m., which was when Grace always called on Tuesdays. Had always called, for years and years, Tuesday afternoons. While Martha was finishing the second-to-last load, Grace would dial from whatever room she was in at the Sterling estate in Greenwich. And they would talk for 45 minutes about everything and nothing. Grace's reading lists, Martha's regulars, the neighborhood gossip, the little ordinary fabric of a life shared between a mother and a daughter separated by 40 miles and a tax bracket. Lately the calls had been shorter. Martha told herself this was normal. A young wife settling into a new home. Busy schedules. The Sterling social calendar was relentless, or so she imagined. Galas and foundation events and board dinners that Grace had never, in her previous life as a librarian in Astoria, attended. She answered on the second ring. "Grace, sweetheart." "Hi, Mom." The voice on the other end was Grace's, and it was also not Grace's. It had Grace's cadence, the slight upward lilt at the end of sentences, but it had been pressed flat, like something dried under a heavy book. There was a careful quality to every word, as though each one had been chosen from a limited and pre-approved list. "How are you doing, honey? You sound." "I'm fine. I've been doing a cleanse." Eleanor suggested it, for spiritual clarity. A pause. "It's really been helping." Martha pressed the phone harder against her ear. Somewhere in the laundromat, a machine clicked over into its rinse cycle. A cleanse. What kind of cleanse? Just fasting. For clarity, Eleanor has a whole program. It's based on scripture. Grace. Martha kept her voice even. "You've been fasting?" It's a structured thing, Mom. Eleanor oversees it. She does it herself. The fluorescent light above the third row of machines had been flickering for 6 days. Martha had noticed it the way you notice everything that needs fixing when you're trying not to think about something else. It stuttered now, white and anxious. "Your voice," Martha said. "It sounds like paper, baby." A long pause. In the background, and Martha strained for this. Had been straining for it in every call for weeks. She could hear nothing. No television, no other voices, just a quality of silence that felt thick and managed, like silence that had been arranged rather than simply arrived at. "I'm fine," Grace said again. "I'll call next week." The line went dead. Martha stood holding the phone. Around her, the machines turned and tumbled and spun out their mechanical noise, filling the air with the clean, chemical scent of detergent and the faint, mineral smell of hot water on old metal. She had stood in this room through her husband's illness and his death, through Grace's high school graduation and her college acceptance, and the night she'd called from a library bathroom in Astoria to cry about a boy who didn't deserve her tears. Martha had stood in this room through everything. "She sounds like paper." She put the phone down and went back to the folding. It was 3 hours later, close to closing time, when she found the envelope tucked between the gas bill and the utility statement in the wire rack beside the register. She almost mistook it for another piece of junk mail. The return address stopped her. It was from a Medicare processing center she didn't recognize, in a state she had no connection to. She opened it. The document inside was an explanation of benefits and EOB, the kind of form Medicare sends out to notify a beneficiary of services rendered. Martha's name was at the top, her Medicare identification number, her date of birth. The services listed were from a clinic she had never heard of, the Meridian Center for Advanced Reproductive Medicine, located in Westport, Connecticut. Services dated across the last 4 months. Consultation. Diagnostic panel. Experimental protocol enrollment. Martha read through the itemized list 3 times. Her hands were perfectly steady. She noticed this with a distant kind of surprise, the way you notice unusual weather. The treatments listed were not standard. They were, based on the careful clinical language, part of a study or program that operated outside the normal insurance approval process. Which was why they had been routed through her Medicare number rather than through the Sterling's private insurance. Eleanor Sterling was using Martha's identity to fund off-the-books fertility treatments. The fluorescent light above the 3rd row flickered once more and then, as if it had simply given up, went dark. Martha stood in the uneven light of her laundromat, the EOB in her hand. The penalty notice a fold of paper in her apron pocket, and she thought about the sound of her daughter's voice. She thought about the word cleanse and the word fasting and the manage, pre-approved quality of every recent sentence. She thought about the gates of the Sterling estate in Greenwich that she had driven past once, just to see, a month ago. Iron and stone and a security camera mounted above the intercom panel. She had told herself she was overthinking. That was what mothers did. She had told herself that Grace was a grown woman, 29 years old, capable of making her own choices, that the distance and the quiet were the normal adjustments of a new marriage, that Eleanor Sterling's intensity was uncomfortable but not dangerous. She had told herself all of that with the particular discipline of a woman who needed very badly to believe it. The dial tone, when she picked up the phone and dialed Grace's number again, screamed back at her in the empty room. Grace. Her voice cracked on the single syllable. She cleared her throat. The machines around her had gone still in the way machines go still when a cycle ends, waiting for the next thing, patient and indifferent. Grace, pick up the damn phone. No answer. The call rang out. Martha Sullivan set the phone down on the folding table. She picked up the EOB. She folded it carefully and put it in the same pocket as the penalty notice, the 2 documents pressed together against her hip. Then she turned off the lights, locked the door, and went home to think. The drive to Greenwich took 40 minutes on a good day and an hour and 20 on the kind of gray Wednesday morning, when the I-95 compressed itself into a slow, grinding ribbon of brake lights and exhaust. Martha left Queens at 6:30, the EOB and the penalty notice in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. A thermos of coffee between her thighs, the radio off. She had spent the previous night at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, writing down what she knew. The legal pad sat on the passenger seat too, its top page covered in her handwriting angular. Compressed letters that her 3rd-grade teacher had called economical, and that Grace had, as a child, called angry-looking. Martha had never argued the point. What she knew: one predatory loan dressed as family generosity, one Medicare fraud document, one daughter whose voice had gone thin and paper dry over the course of 6 months, one empty pill organizer she had not yet seen but could not stop thinking about. What she did not know: the full shape of the thing she was driving toward. The Sterling estate sat at the end of a private road in the back country section of Greenwich, the part of town where the houses ceased to be visible from any public thoroughfare and the GPS grew uncertain and recursive. Martha had the address from a card Julian had given her at the wedding, embossed creamstock with a monogrammed S in the corner. The kind of card that was less a means of communication than a declaration of category. The iron gates were closed. They were always closed, she suspected, but they were closed in a particular and deliberate way this morning. The intercom panel dark. The security camera's small red light blinking steadily above it, aware of her. Martha pulled to the shoulder of the private road, put the car in park, and sat looking at the gates for a moment. She pressed the intercom button. It buzzed. She waited. A man's voice, young, professional, the particular flatness of someone trained to convey authority without personality. Sullivan Laundry Services. Martha Sullivan, Grace Sterling's mother. I'm here to see my daughter. A pause longer than it needed to be. Then, Mrs. Sullivan. 1 moment. The moment stretched to 3 minutes. The camera blinked. A crow landed on the stone pillar to the right of the gate, regarded Martha's car with brief contempt, and departed. When the gate intercom crackled again, it was a different voice, still young, still professional, but carrying something additional. A rehearsed quality that told her the words had been prepared before she arrived. Mrs. Sullivan, I've been asked to provide you with documentation. Please step out of your vehicle to receive it. Martha got out. The air smelled of pine and money, that particular combination of cold, clean oxygen and immaculate landscaping that she associated with institutional wealth. The kind of clean that required a staff to maintain. A man in a dark jacket was approaching from inside the gate, which had opened 6 inches for him and no more. He was holding an envelope. He passed it through the gap without meeting her eyes. The document inside was printed on legal letterhead. Martha read the header: application for limited guardianship grounds, diminished mental capacity of non-resident parent. Her name was listed as the subject. Eleanor Sterling was listed as the petitioning party. The application cited, in formal legal language, a history of erratic behavior, financial instability, and documented alcoholism that rendered Martha Sullivan unfit to make unsupervised contact decisions regarding Grace Sterling, née Sullivan. Martha read it once. She folded it. She put it in the manila envelope with the other documents. Tell Mrs. Sterling, she said to the man in the jacket, that I'll be getting a lawyer. He said nothing. The gate stayed where it was. Martha drove back down the private road and turned onto the main road and pulled into the first gas station she found, where she sat in the parking lot for 7 minutes, with the engine running and her hands folded in her lap, breathing slowly, the way she'd learned to breathe during the year of her husband's decline, when the breathing was the only thing she could control. Diminished mental capacity. She was 62 years old and ran a small business and paid her taxes and had raised a daughter by herself after her husband died, and somewhere in a stone house at the end of a private road. A woman who had known her for 14 months had filed a legal document claiming she was an alcoholic in mental decline. You were a stain on their white silk world before you even walked through the door. She pulled out of the gas station and drove back toward Greenwich Center. She wasn't ready to get on the highway yet. She needed to move, to be in motion without a destination for a moment, and the surface streets of Greenwich offered that wide, tree-lined, quiet. The kind of order that existed to reassure the people who lived there. She almost missed Julian. He was coming out of a coffee shop on the main commercial street, a paper cup in one hand, his phone in the other, wearing a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than Martha's car insurance for a year. He was 40 feet ahead of her, walking toward a black SUV parked at the curb, and Martha pulled over without deciding to. She got out of the car. Julian. He turned, and she watched it happen, the recognition, and then the thing that came after the recognition, which was not warmth or guilt or even the practiced cordiality she might have expected from a man of his training. It was something more naked and more telling. His eyes went to his coffee cup, to his phone, to the sidewalk to his left, and then, finally, with the effortful quality of a decision being made under duress, back to her face. Martha. His voice was even. His hand, the one holding the coffee cup, tightened almost imperceptibly around the cardboard sleeve. I didn't know you were in Greenwich. I came to see Grace. She kept her voice level. She had decided in the parking lot that she was going to stay level. Because the alternative, the thing inside her chest that wanted to break through the level and become something else entirely, would not help Grace. The gate was closed. A man gave me guardianship papers. Julian's jaw moved once. He looked at the sidewalk again and then back up at her, and she noticed with the particular sharpness of a woman who had spent 30+ years reading people across a laundromat counter, that his left hand, the one not holding the coffee, was pressed flat against his thigh, as though he was holding it still by force. It's a precautionary measure, he said. Eleanor's legal team recommended it. There were some concerns about the stress levels at the estate, and Julian. Martha said his name the way she said a price when a customer tried to negotiate one. Flat, final. Where is my daughter? His hand moved, involuntary, a small adjustment, fingers spreading and refolding, and then he lifted his wrist to check his watch. The gesture had the quality of a man checking a clock because he couldn't bear to look at the person asking the question. The watch caught the thin November light platinum case, dark face, the kind of watch that communicated that its owner did not need to think about cost. "She's at the estate," he said. "She's in a period of reflection. Eleanor facilitates these programs. It's a spiritual practice. Is she eating?" The question landed in the space between them. Julian took a sip of his coffee. His eyes went to the middle distance. "She's on a structured nutrition program." "A structured nutrition program," Martha repeated. "It's supervised." Eleanor, Martha said, and stopped. She picked up the sentence and said it down differently. "I would like to speak to my daughter." Julian looked at her, then really looked, for the first time in the conversation, and what she saw in his face was not cruelty. It was something more complicated and in some ways worse. The expression of a man who knew exactly what was happening and had decided, for reasons of his own, to continue standing very still. His hand on his thigh had gone still too. "I'll pass along your request," he said. He turned and walked to the black SUV. Martha stood on the sidewalk and watched him go. The SUV pulled out. She committed the license plate to memory, a habit from years of managing a business, where she'd learned that written records were the difference between a misunderstanding and a documented fact. She drove home through the back streets of Greenwich, and she was halfway to the highway when she had to pull over again, not because she was crying, though she might have been, a little, in the particular dry way of a woman who had decided a long time ago that crying was something you did quietly and briefly, and then stopped, but because something was pulling at the edge of her attention, something she'd been trying to name since the morning. On her second pass along the road that ran below the Sterling Estate's rear property line, she'd noticed a garbage collection area near the service entrance, the kind of municipal receptacle that even the wealthiest estates use, because garbage is the one thing money cannot make disappear. She hadn't registered what she'd seen until now, held up at a red light on the post road. Her mind sorting through the details of the morning the way she sorted a load of laundry mechanically, systematically, until everything was in the right pile. She made a U-turn. The service entrance garbage area was at the corner of the property, accessible from a side road, screened by a low privet hedge that had not been trimmed recently enough. Martha parked and walked the 10 feet to the receptacles and looked. The pill organizer was sitting on top of a white kitchen bag that had split at one seam. It was the 7-day kind, the plastic boxes labeled with days of the week, each compartment designed to hold a set of medications, the kind available at any drugstore. It was pale blue. Grace's name was written on the inside of the lid in a thin, careful hand that Martha recognized as neither Grace's nor Julian's. She picked it up. The compartments were labeled not with days but with functions. The printed sticker strip across the top read Nutrition, Sleep Support, Clarity, Foundation. Every compartment labeled Nutrition was empty. Martha stood at the edge of the Sterling Estates service road, holding a small blue pill organizer in her hand. The cold air moving through the privet hedge with a sound like breath. She thought about Grace's voice on the phone. She thought about fasting for clarity. She thought about the words structured nutrition program as Julian's eyes moved to his watch. She put the organizer in the manila envelope. She got in her car. The iron gate, as she drove past the estate's front entrance on her way to the highway, was still closed. The camera still blinked. The stone still stood. Martha Sullivan looked at it in her rearview mirror until the road curved and the gate disappeared. She pressed her foot against the accelerator and drove south toward Queens. And she held her face very still the whole way, because the thing inside her chest had changed shape now. It wasn't fear anymore. Fear had been what she felt last night with the legal pad and the yellow light in her kitchen. What she felt now was older and harder and had a direction to it. The way cold iron has a direction, it doesn't move toward warmth. It simply holds and holds and holds. "I'm not leaving until I see my daughter's eyes." The words formed somewhere behind her sternum, clear and calm, like a recording she had made and was now playing back. She hadn't said them out loud. She didn't need to. She'd remember them. She drove, and the highway opened up ahead of her, and the machines back in Queens were waiting. And she had a phone call to make to someone she hadn't spoken to in 4 years. The invitation came on a Thursday, which Martha found almost insulting in its efficiency, as though Eleanor Sterling's people had anticipated her next move and prepared the terrain accordingly. It was not addressed to Martha personally. It was a printed card, thick cream stock, the embossed letterhead of the Pure Light Foundation. A legacy of healing and grace, mailed to the laundromat's business address. Annual Benefit Gala, the Meridian Ballroom, Greenwich. Saturday evening. In gratitude for your community's continued support. Martha stared at it for a long time. She thought about the guardianship application sitting in her manila envelope. She thought about the pill organizer. She wore the dress she'd bought for Grace's wedding, navy blue, conservative. The kind of dress you could wear to a funeral or a celebration depending on what you put with it. She drove to Greenwich on Saturday evening with the manila envelope in her bag and arrived at the Meridian Ballroom at 7:15. When the cocktail hour was in its second glass and the noise level had reached the particular pitch of wealthy people performing ease, she gave her name at the door. The woman at the check-in table found no listing. Martha said, calmly, that she was Martha Sullivan, the mother of Grace Sterling, and that she was there as a guest of the family. The woman checked again, looked uncertain, and was still deciding when a couple pressed in behind Martha. And in the small social confusion of that moment, Martha walked through. The ballroom was everything the laundromat was not: vaulted ceiling, crystal chandeliers, round tables draped in white linen. A string quartet in the corner playing something that cost a lot per hour to sound effortless. The crowd was what Martha had expected: the particular assembly of Greenwich and surrounding money-old families, new tech wealth. Their representatives in philanthropy and medicine and law, all dressed in the shared language of discreet expense. She found a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and walked the room, looking for Grace. She did not find Grace. She found Eleanor. Eleanor Sterling at 64 was the kind of woman who moved through a room the way weather moves through a landscape. You became aware of her presence gradually and then all at once. She was tall, silver-haired, dressed in white, and she wore her authority the way the very practiced wear it, not as performance, but as climate. The people around her tilted slightly in her direction, the way plants tilt toward light. She saw Martha at the same moment Martha saw her. The distance between them was perhaps 30 feet, and for a fraction of a second Eleanor's expression showed something unguarded, a flash of rapid calculation. The kind that happens in the quarter second before the public face reassembles itself. Then the reassembly happened, smooth and total, and Eleanor Sterling was walking toward Martha with her hand extended, and her smile in place, and the people nearest them were already turning to watch, because there was something in Eleanor's velocity that said an event is about to occur. Martha, her voice carried just enough to reach the nearest tables. What a surprise! Martha took the offered hand briefly. Eleanor's grip was dry and cool and lasted exactly long enough to be photographed. Which Martha realized, glancing to her right, it was a photographer from one of the local social publications, was already angled toward them, lens up. I came to see Grace, Martha said. Of course you did. Eleanor's voice was warm with the particular warmth of a woman who has spent 40 years perfecting warmth as a social instrument. She turned slightly, just enough to include the nearest cluster of guests in the conversation's radius, which Martha understood immediately as a tactical choice. Martha runs a laundry business in Queens, Eleanor said, to no one in particular, with the lightness of a woman sharing an amusing anecdote. She's Grace's mother, from her previous life. We think of her as family, in the way that one thinks of all the people who shaped our loved ones before they grew. A small, appreciative murmur from the nearest guests. Martha held her face steady. She drove all the way from Queens, Eleanor continued. Despite a small pause, weighted and careful. Despite some difficulties that I'm afraid have made visits complicated lately. What difficulties? Martha said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor tilted her head with the expression of a woman doing her best to be gentle about something unpleasant. Martha, We've had to put some protective measures in place for Grace's well-being. I'm sure you understand. I'd like to understand it from Grace. Around them, the cluster of guests had grown. Not obviously, not rudely, these were people too well trained for that, but the gravitational pull of the scene had done its work. And there were now perhaps 8 people within hearing range, several of them with the attentive stillness of an audience at a play. Eleanor's voice dropped a register, became confiding, the tone of a woman sharing a private sorrow with a wider audience. The Foundation has encountered this before, unfortunately. Family members, parents, sometimes who struggle when a loved one makes significant life changes. The drinking becomes worse. The calls become erratic. It's heartbreaking, really. She looked at Martha with an expression of practiced sorrow. We got the reports from the neighbors. The incident at the laundromat last spring. There was no incident. Martha had never had a drinking problem in her life. She kept her voice level. Eleanor. And of course, the financial situation. Eleanor turned slightly to include 2 women in the conversation, both in their 50s. Both wearing the studied neutrality of people absorbing information they intend to use later. Martha's been having some difficulties. We've tried to help, which I'm afraid she's misinterpreted. Unwashed hands reaching for something that doesn't belong to them. It happens in families. We don't hold it against her. One of the women made a soft sound of sympathy. Not for Martha. Martha set her glass of sparkling water on a nearby table. You filed a guardianship application claiming I'm a demented alcoholic, she said. Her voice was even. She was not performing evenness. She had achieved it through the particular discipline of a woman who had been handling difficult customers for 30 years. And knew that the first person who raises their voice has already lost. On the basis of that application, your security staff turned me away from seeing my daughter. I have documentation of Medicare fraud connected to your foundation. And I have a pill organizer from your trash with my daughter's name on it and every nutrition compartment empty. The room had gone quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when something real enters it. Eleanor's smile did not change. This was the remarkable thing. The smile held, steady and luminous, as though Martha had said nothing of consequence. She's unwell, Eleanor said, to the room rather than to Martha, gently, the way you speak about someone not present. She thinks Grace is being held against her will. It's a very common presentation. The legal team has seen it many times. She's not a doll, Martha said. Her voice cracked slightly on the word, the first crack she'd allowed herself, and she steadied it immediately. She's not a doll, Eleanor. She's my blood. Eleanor turned to one of the foundation's board members, a silver-haired man in a dark suit, who had materialized at her elbow with the efficiency of long practice, and said something to him in a low voice. He nodded and looked at Martha with the expression of a man who has been asked to manage an unfortunate situation. I'll need you to leave, he said. He was not unkind about it. That was almost the worst part. I'd like to see my daughter first. Mrs. Sullivan. Martha looked up. The ballroom's second floor had a gallery, a wide balcony with an iron railing, designed for the overflow at large events. Someone was standing at the railing. It was Grace. She was wearing white, which should have been ordinary, but wasn't. It was the white of something ceremonial. A high-necked dress with long sleeves, and her hair was pulled back in a way that was severe rather than elegant, and she was standing very still. From 30 feet below and across the room, Martha could see that she was thinner than the last wedding photo Julian had texted 4 months ago. Thinner than thin in the way that registered not as fashion but as absence. Their eyes met. Martha had an impression, brief and fierce, of recognition, of her daughter's face opening toward her. The way a window opens, the sudden rush of real air, and then Eleanor moved. She turned, located Grace on the balcony with the efficiency of a woman who keeps track of all exits, and said something to a woman standing near the gallery stairs. The woman went up. The balcony curtain, heavy white damask, was drawn closed, and Grace was gone. Martha stood at the center of the ballroom floor, surrounded by the crystalline noise of people resuming their conversations, the string quartet re-entering on a new phrase. The whole event reassembling itself around the disruption she'd created as smoothly as water closes over a stone. The board member's hand was at her elbow, not rough, not unkind, but definite. "This way, Mrs. Sullivan." She went. She didn't fight it. She filed it all, the smile, the performance, the exact phrase, unwashed hands, the moment the curtain closed over Grace's face. In the precise, unforgiving memory she'd been keeping since Tuesday. In the parking lot, she sat in her car and put the manila envelope on the passenger seat and added to it, from her purse, a cocktail napkin on which she had written the board member's name and the name of the photographer and the names of the two women who'd been standing nearby. She wrote the time. She wrote the exact words Eleanor had said. She drove home through the dark and the cold, her hands steady on the wheel. The laughter from the ballroom still faintly audible in some part of her memory that she had not yet managed to close off. Glass in my ears. That was what it felt like. Not the laughter itself, but the quality of it, the way it had moved around her as she was escorted out. Easy and collective and indifferent. The laughter of people who had already decided what she was and found her removal mildly entertaining. She had one friend from childhood who worked for the NYPD. She had not called in 4 years. The time difference between that and now felt, in the cold of the parking lot outside her building, very small. She drove home and dialed the number from memory. And the phone rang 3 times before it picked up, and the voice on the other end said, "Well, I'll be damned." Detective Sarah Miller. "Martha Sullivan, how long has it been?" "Too long," Martha said. "Sarah, I need to ask you something." The Sterling lawyers moved fast. By Monday morning, Martha had received a certified letter from a firm in Stamford, 4 attorneys' names on the letterhead, partners. All, the kind of partnership that advertises in the back pages of Greenwich magazine. Informing her that any further attempts to contact Grace Sterling, any further appearance at Sterling Properties or Sterling Foundation events, and any further discussion of Sterling family matters with third parties would be met with legal action. The letter cited the guardianship application. It cited malicious interference with family proceedings. It used the word harassment 3 times in 4 paragraphs. Martha read it at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning with her coffee and her yellow legal pad. And she added it to the manila envelope and wrote the firm name and the date on the outside of the envelope in her angular, economical hand. Sarah Miller called at 8. "Okay," Sarah said, without preamble. "I pulled what I can pull. Martha, I have to be careful here. These people have money and lawyers. And the kind of connections that make my lieutenant go quiet when I say the name Sterling. I'm not saying I won't help you. I'm saying I need you to understand the terrain." "I understand the terrain," Martha said. "I've been trying to see my daughter for 2 months. A pause. The Medicare fraud document, that's federal. That's out of my jurisdiction unless it connects to something stateside. The pill organizer, it's not nothing, but it's not enough on its own. Without corroboration, their lawyers will argue you found it on a public roadway. And that you've been making up a narrative to justify harassing a family that's done nothing wrong. They forged a guardianship application. I know, and that's potentially actionable, but it takes time, Martha. It takes." "She's 84 pounds. Martha said it quietly. She'd done the math from what she'd seen at the gala, the narrowness of Grace's shoulders, the way her wrists had been visible. Even at that distance, the particular look of a body being depleted. She looked like she was 84 pounds, Sarah. She looked like a ghost." A long silence on the line. Then, "I'll see what I can do on the medical angle. But Martha, you have to stay away from them. If you get arrested for trespassing or for harassment, they will use that. Do you understand me? They will use it to validate every word of that guardianship application." "I understand. I'll be in touch." The call ended. Martha set the phone on the table. The kitchen was quiet. It was the kitchen she had shared with her husband for 19 years and with Grace for all of Grace's life. A narrow galley in a walk-up in Woodside that had been updated exactly once since they moved in a new refrigerator in 2009, after the old one finally surrendered. The walls were the yellow of old paint. The window over the sink looked out onto an airshaft. It was a room Martha had always loved, in the particular way. You love places that have held you through difficult things not because they are beautiful but because they are known. On the table, among the bills and the legal pad in the manila envelope, were 3 plastic containers of banchan. The small side dishes Martha had been making every Sunday for the last month, Grace's favorites from childhood. The ones she'd been packing in the week she'd planned to bring to Greenwich before the gates were shut to her. Braised potatoes, spinach, the pickled radish that Grace had called the pink stuff until she was 7 years old. Martha had made them with the specific, irrational determination of a woman who needed something to do with her hands. And they had been sitting in the refrigerator over long, and looking at them now she felt something in her chest compress. She got up. She took out the reverse mortgage papers from the second drawer of the filing cabinet by the window, the drawer she'd been avoiding, the one with the documents. Julian had walked her through last spring, in this very kitchen. With his warm voice and his excellent posture and his explanation of how this was the most sensible financial vehicle for a woman in her position. He had explained it so thoroughly, so carefully, so completely to her satisfaction, that she had signed 3 pages without consulting anyone. She spread the papers on the table. She was not a financial expert, but she had run a small business for 22 years, and she was not, despite what Eleanor Sterling's lawyers had put in writing, diminished in her mental capacity. She could read a document. She could understand, now that she was reading without Julian's voice in the room, providing a simultaneous translation, that what she had signed was not a line of credit against the apartment's value. It was a structured instrument that, under the terms she had agreed to, would transfer the property if she missed 2 consecutive payment thresholds. Thresholds that the 401k withdrawal penalty and the legal fees she was now facing would make impossible to meet. She was going to lose the apartment. The clock on the microwave read 9:14. The kitchen was very quiet. Martha sat with the reverse mortgage papers in front of her and the banchan on the counter and the manila envelope on the table. And she was 62 years old and had no savings left and was about to lose her home and had not spoken to her daughter in 3 weeks. She looked at Grace's graduation photo. It was on the refrigerator, held by a magnet from a hardware store Grace at 22, in her cap and gown, her head thrown back, laughing at something the photographer had said. She had been so beautiful in that moment. Not the controlled, arranged beauty she had been at the gala in her white dress. This was the other kind. The kind that comes from the inside. The kind that you can't purchase or direct. Am I just an old burden? The thought arrived in a voice that wasn't quite her own. Or was her own from a long time ago, from the year after her husband died, when she had lain awake asking versions of it in the dark. Was I always the wrong kind of help? Was I always someone they needed to manage rather than someone who was? She stopped herself. She pressed her palms flat against the table. She reached into the box where she kept Grace's letters, paper letters. The old-fashioned kind that Grace had sent through her 20s as a running joke between them, because everyone our age texts and I want to be different, and she started going through them. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She was looking for Grace. For the version of Grace that existed before the Sterling estate, for evidence of her daughter's real voice in ink. She had been going through the box for 20 minutes when she found it. It was folded small, no envelope, just a square of notepaper tucked into the bottom of a gift bag from Christmas. The gift bag with the red tissue paper that had held a pair of slippers Grace had given her. She had kept the bag because Grace had chosen the tissue paper. Specifically, buying it in gold at the last minute because she'd remembered Martha once saying she liked gold. Martha had kept the bag because of the gold tissue paper. The note was in Grace's handwriting, but not the careful, managed script of recent months. This was Grace's real handwriting, fast and slightly slanted, the way she wrote when she wasn't performing anything for anyone. Mom, if I stop calling, look for the sanctuary. It's in the basement. I love you. Martha read it 3 times. She turned it over, blank on the back. She sat very still for a long moment. Then something inside her, some final support that had been bearing the weight of the last 2 months, shifted and broke in the manner of old wood, not a snap but a slow, final giving, and she was crying. Though she didn't register it as crying exactly, it was more like her face was doing something separate from her while her brain kept working, kept cataloging sanctuary. Basement. She knew. She knew before she stopped calling. She put this in the gift bag months ago because she knew before the calls stopped entirely. She cried for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because the clock on the microwave moved from 941 to 952. She kept track because tracking things was what she did. At 952 she got up. She washed her face at the kitchen sink. She dried her face with a paper towel. She looked out the airshaft window at the gray November sky above the building across the way. If I lose everything, Eleanor. She said it to the airshaft, to the gray sky, to the clock on the microwave. Her voice was hoarse but steady. If I lose every single thing, you're coming with me. She picked up the phone and called Sarah Miller. The sanctuary, she said, when Sarah answered. It's in the basement of the estate. Grace told me. She put it in a note months ago. A silence. Then Sarah's voice changed. How long ago did she write this? Christmas. Sarah, Christmas. Another silence. Longer. I'm going to make some calls, Sarah said. Martha, don't do anything until I call you back. Martha looked at the graduation photo on the refrigerator. Grace's head thrown back. The real laugh. Call me back fast, Martha said. Friends, what a journey we're on with Martha Sullivan. In just 4 sequences, we've watched a woman piece together a terrifying truth from a penalty notice, a discarded pill organizer, and a note hidden in Christmas tissue paper. Martha isn't a detective or a lawyer or a woman with powerful connections. She's a laundromat owner from Queens who raised her daughter alone, and the people who underestimated her, who called her demented, who called her alcoholic, who showed her the gate and the legal letterhead and thought that would be the end of it. They have no idea what's coming. Grace hid that note at Christmas. Think about that. She knew, even then, that she might need her mother to find her. And Martha found it. Now she has the note, the evidence, Detective Miller, and something that Eleanor Sterling, for all her galas and her legal team, and her foundation and her white dresses, has never had and cannot buy the specific, focused rage of a mother who's been told her daughter is not her daughter anymore. The gates didn't stop her. The lawyers didn't stop her. The laughter at the gala didn't stop her. Stay with us, friends. Martha Sullivan is just getting started. The call did not come that night. Martha sat in the kitchen until midnight, the legal pad in front of her and the banchan untouched on the counter. And then she went to bed because she had learned long ago that the body's requirements do not pause for emergencies. You sleep or you become unreliable, and she could not afford to become unreliable. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and let her mind go back, not by choice but because in the quiet of 2 a.m. the mind goes where it needs to go. The wedding. She had been so proud that day. Not of the wedding itself. The Sterling production had been immense and formal and had nothing of Grace's actual taste in it. No wildflowers, no jazz quartet, no cake with lemon curd that Grace had wanted since she was 12 years old. But she had been proud of Grace, of her daughter standing there in white looking like someone stepping into a future, and she had stood in the back of the receiving line, telling herself that a mother's job was to let go gracefully, that this was what letting go gracefully looked like. Eleanor had arranged a premarital cleansing. That was what she had called it, a spiritual preparation, a family tradition of the Sterlings, a day of fasting and prayer before the ceremony. Martha had been told this was a joyful tradition. She had not been invited to participate. She had been housed in a guest cottage on the property and told that breakfast would be brought to her. She remembered now, and this was the thing the mind was insisting on, why she was lying awake at 2 a.m. pulling at this particular thread. She remembered looking out the window of the guest cottage in the late afternoon and seeing Grace crossing the formal garden. And Grace had raised her hand in a wave, and Martha had waved back. And then she had watched Eleanor appear at the French doors of the main house and say something, and Grace had turned and gone inside, and the doors had closed. And then at dinner she remembered this clearly now, with the particular clarity that arrives when you finally let yourself remember something you've been filing away. At dinner, the dining room doors had been locked. She had tried them herself, thinking she was confused about the layout of the house, and they were locked from the inside. She had gone around to the garden entrance and found Eleanor standing in the doorway. And Eleanor had said, gently, that the family was having a private meal before the ceremony and that Martha should have dinner in the cottage. Grace had been hungry. Martha had not let herself finish that thought at the time. She was finishing it now, in the dark, 6 months later. Grace had been locked in the dining room, hungry, the night before her wedding, and I told myself it was a tradition I didn't understand. And the smart home system. Grace had mentioned it once, briefly, during a phone call in the early months of the marriage. She'd been trying to show Martha how to use the thermostat remotely if she ever stayed over, and she'd opened the app on her phone. And Martha had seen the logs over her shoulder: room occupancy, door status, a section labeled lower level that Grace had closed quickly. Martha had thought nothing of it. A large house had a large monitoring system. Lower level, the sanctuary, the basement, and the vitamins. She was there now, in the place her mind had been leading her. The thing she'd been finding the edges of all night. Eleanor had presented Grace with a supplement regimen in the second month of the marriage. Martha had seen the bottles, lined up on the kitchen counter during one of her early visits, brown glass with handwritten labels. Foundation, clarity, serenity. She had thought, without thinking too hard, that they were the kind of expensive wellness products that people with money purchased as a matter of course. They had been sedatives. Someone with medical knowledge, a pharmacy connection, and a plan had been systematically sedating her daughter for months. And Martha had seen the bottles and thought, wellness products. I handed her the keys to her own cage. The thought settled in the dark with the weight of something final. I stood at the gate of the Sterling estate and thought it was the gate of a new life. I saw the bottles on the counter and thought, she's married well, she's being taken care of. I handed her the keys, Grace. I walked her right up to the door and I let go of her hand. She lay still. The ceiling was the same ceiling it had always been. Forgive me, she said it without sound, just the shape of it in the dark. I didn't see the wolf. I was so busy trying not to be the difficult mother, the queen's mother, the too much mother. I didn't see the wolf standing in front of me in white cashmere, handing me a financial instrument and calling it generosity. She got up at 5 a.m. She made coffee. She took out the note again: if I stop calling, look for the sanctuary, and read it one more time. Then she opened the yellow legal pad to a fresh page and wrote, at the top, what I know. What I can prove. What I need. She was still writing when Sarah Miller called at 7:23 a.m. Okay, Sarah said. Her voice had the particular texture of someone who had been up early and making phone calls. I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to tell me when you're ready. Martha set down her pen. I'm ready. I can't get a warrant on what we have. Not yet. The Medicare fraud is being looked at federally. I've passed your document to someone who can move on it, but federal timelines are what they are. The note isn't enough for a welfare check. Their lawyers will argue it's fabricated or misinterpreted. I need something more. I need something from inside the estate. Martha looked at her legal pad. At the third item she had written under what I need. I know the layout of a laundry room, she said. A silence. Then, Martha, service entrances, utility chutes, the systems behind the systems. I've been in more houses than you'd think, Sarah. The kind of houses where the laundry staff comes through the back. Another silence. Longer this time. If you get caught, Sarah said, I cannot help you. They will arrest you and the guardianship application will become Exhibit A in everything they do next. Then I won't get caught, Martha said. What do you need me to bring out? Sarah told her. Martha wrote it down. She underlined the list once. Then she tore the page from the legal pad and put it in the pocket with the note from Grace. She poured the rest of her coffee down the sink, changed her clothes, and started making plans. The laundry chute was on the north side of the estate, accessible through the service courtyard behind the kitchen wing. Martha had found it on her second reconnaissance of the property perimeter, a Saturday afternoon drive, 2 days after her conversation with Sarah. A slow pass along the service road with her windows down and her eyes open, the way she'd learned to look at unfamiliar spaces for the things that aren't meant to be noticed. Commercial laundry chutes in residential estates were ventilated through the exterior wall, always fire code, thermal management. The simple practicality of a duct that moved hot, damp air from the basement up and out. She'd looked for the exhaust vent, found it, mapped the angle from the vent to the service door. She'd been in 100 houses through the back. Rich houses, houses with staff wings and service corridors. And the particular geography of privilege that divided the seen from the unseen, the presentation rooms from the working rooms. She knew how they were built. She knew which doors locked automatically and which ones relied on staff diligence. She knew the rhythm of a night shift household. She called in a favor to a former regular at the laundromat, a man named Torres who'd been bringing his work uniforms in every Thursday for 11 years and who had, in a previous life before landscaping, installed residential security systems. She described the exterior camera setup from her drives past the property. He described, patiently and without asking why she needed to know, the standard protocols for ring-adjacent estate systems. The motion detection windows, the recording intervals, the gap between alert trigger and response, the small, technical seam between the seen and the unseen. Then she called Sarah. "I need you watching the camera logs remotely," Martha said. "If you can access the alert feed without leaving a trace, can you do that?" A pause. "I know someone who might owe me a favor," Sarah said carefully. "Martha, if this goes wrong, I'll tell them I came alone. You were never involved." "That's not Martha. That's not," a sound of frustration. "Fine. Tell me the date and time." She chose 3 a.m. on a Thursday, because in her experience of late shift laundry pickups from large houses, she'd done commercial accounts for 2 Greenwich estates in the late 90s, before the account stopped being worth the drive. Thursday nights were the night the security rotation was thinnest. Weekends were tight. Mondays and Tuesdays the staff was alert and reorganizing. Thursdays, in the particular administrative logic of large household management, were the dead middle of the cycle. She packed a canvas bag, a penlight, a pair of thin work gloves, a prepaid phone with Sarah's number saved, the list of what Sarah needed her to find. At 2:47 a.m. she parked a quarter-mile down the service road, in the shadow of an overgrown spruce windbreak that the Sterling landscapers had not recently touched. And she walked the rest of the way in the cold and the dark with the bag over her shoulder and her work boots quiet on the gravel. The service courtyard was dark except for the motion sensor light above the kitchen door, but motion sensors were directional. And she knew the angle from Torres' description. She came in from the east, below the sensor's arc, and reached the north wall without triggering anything. The laundry chute access panel was exactly where she'd calculated a metal door, 18 inches square, set into the foundation at knee height. The kind used for linen drops from upper floors to the basement laundry room. She'd brought a flathead screwdriver for the simple latch she'd expected. The latch was simple. The panel opened. The chute was wider than residential standard. This was an old estate, built when service chutes were built for actual service. And Martha was not a large woman. She went in feet first with the bag on her chest and pulled the panel almost closed behind her and descended in the dark. The metal smooth and cold under her gloved hands. The basement was large, she could tell from the temperature shift and the way sound moved when she dropped from the chute into the laundry room. A cathedral quality to the darkness, multiple chambers connecting. She turned on the penlight, keeping it low. The laundry room was commercial-scale industrial washers, folding tables, a linen shelving system. Standard. She moved through it to the connecting corridor. The basement had the thick, cold smell of stone construction overlaid with incense. An incongruous combination, cloying and sweet, the kind of scent associated with ceremonial spaces rather than domestic ones. Her phone buzzed once. Sarah's signal. "I'm in the system. You have about 20 minutes before the alert cycle resets. Move." She moved. The corridor connected to what had originally been a wine cellar, stone-walled, vaulted, and that connected to a room she had not been expecting, a converted space. Clearly renovated relatively recently, with smooth drywall over the stone and a ventilation system and a solid core door with a keypad lock. The keypad was lit. She photographed it. She tried the handle, locked, and noted the make and model, and photographed that too. She could hear, or thought she could hear, a sound from behind the door, faint, rhythmic, possibly mechanical, possibly something else. She pressed her ear to the door. Her heart was going hard and fast. She stood up straight. She moved on. The house tablet was where Sarah had told her it would be, a charging station in the utility room adjacent to the laundry. The kind of centralized home management interface that controlled systems throughout the estate. She woke the screen with a gloved finger. The passcode Sarah had obtained through means Martha had not asked about worked on the second attempt. She navigated to the health management log. The file was titled Resident Health Records Private. She opened it. The entries were dated and timestamped. The most recent read: Patient G, Day 12 of Purge Protocol. Weight 38 kg. Subject continues to resist oral sedation, switching to IV supplement administration. Spirit shows resistance but weakening. Foundation work continues. L. Sterling supervising. Martha's penlight held steady. Her hand holding it held steady. The rest of her, the part that was not the penlight and not the hand, was somewhere else. Somewhere far from this basement. Somewhere with Grace at age 6 and age 12 and age 22 laughing at the photographer. And she brought herself back with the specific physical effort of returning from a great distance. She photographed the screen. Every page. She found the sedative inventory log, the compounds, the dosages, the handwritten formulas that corresponded to the bottles with the pretty wellness labels she had seen on Grace's kitchen counter 6 months ago. She photographed those. She found the forged power of attorney documentation scanned into the file system. She photographed the metadata that showed the document's creation date 14 days before Eleanor had produced it at the gala. She found the Medicare billing records. She photographed the lot. She checked her phone. 14 minutes gone. 6 remaining. She filled her pockets, not literally. She had no physical originals to take, only photographs in the prepaid phone's memory. Photographs that would need to be downloaded and authenticated before a court. But that were, she was confident, enough to show Sarah what Sarah needed to see. The incense smell was thick in the corridor. Standing in it felt like standing in something that had been constructed to resemble peace while containing the opposite. She moved back through the wine cellar, back through the laundry room, back to the chute. She climbed. The metal was cold. Her arms were 62 years old and had carried laundry for 30 of them and did not fail her now. She came out through the panel, closed it behind her, moved east along the foundation wall and back around the corner before the motion sensor's arc, and she walked down the gravel road in the dark with her bag over her shoulder and the phone in her pocket, and she breathed in the cold November air. "Hold on, baby," she said it to the dark and the trees and the iron gate receding behind her. Her voice was very quiet. "Mom's here." She reached the car. She got in. She sat for 30 seconds with her hands on the wheel and her eyes closed. Then she started the engine and drove. Sarah Miller saw the photographs at 6 a.m. By 8 a.m. she was on the phone with the SVU prosecutor. By noon, the warrant application had been filed. The call came to Martha at 4:17 p.m. on Friday, the same time Grace used to call on Tuesdays. A coincidence Martha would think about later, in the way you think about the small coincidences that surround significant events. Sarah's voice was different from all previous calls, compressed, fast, factual. "We have the warrant. We're going in at 6. Martha, you're not coming. Sarah, you are not coming. You understand me? You'll be at the perimeter. You'll wait. If you step on that property before I clear it, I will arrest you myself and everything we've built falls apart. Are we clear?" Martha looked at Grace's graduation photo on the refrigerator. "We're clear," she said. She drove to Greenwich anyway and parked 100 yards from the estate gate, because perimeter had not been defined with sufficient precision. and she intended to be as close to the perimeter as the word permitted. The SBU units went in at 6:04 p.m. 2 marked cars, 1 unmarked, Sarah Miller's vehicle, and what looked like a medical support van. The gate that had been closed against Martha for 2 months opened for them with the cooperation of the access code. Sarah's team had pulled from the estate management records. She watched the vehicles disappear up the driveway and she sat in her car with the engine off and her hands in her lap. She had expected the waiting to be the worst thing. It was not the worst thing. The worst thing was the moment, 23 minutes in, when the ambulance came. She had not seen an ambulance in the convoy going in. This one came from a different direction, responding to a medical call, and it turned into the Sterling estate with its lights going but its sirens off. Which was a particular kind of ominous, the restraint of it. She was out of the car before she decided to be. Her feet were on the asphalt and she was walking, and she made herself stop at the gate post. The exact boundary of the word perimeter, and she held onto the iron post with both hands and she waited. It was 41 minutes total. Sarah appeared at the gate on foot, moving fast, her expression doing something complicated that Martha had known her long enough to read. It was the expression of a professional encountering something that has crossed a line even for professionals. She's alive, Sarah said immediately, because she knew Martha well enough to know that was the first question. She's conscious. She's Martha. They're bringing her out now. I need you to be prepared. I'm prepared. She weighs 84 pounds. She's been. Sarah stopped. Started again. The medical log was accurate. 12 days of the current protocol, but this protocol was built on 6 months of prior ones. She's severely malnourished. She's been on a sedative compound that we're still identifying, and she's coherent. But she's frightened and she's physically very weak. The EMTs are going to stabilize her before transport. I need you to. I'm prepared, Martha said again. They brought Grace out on a gurney. Martha saw her daughter from 30 feet away and she knew the distance was a mercy that Sarah had positioned her here, at the gate post. So that the first sight of Grace would happen with the width of the driveway between them, so that Martha could absorb it without Grace having to absorb Martha absorbing it. Grace was small. She had always been slender, but this was not slenderness. This was the kind of diminishment that happens to a body that has been systematically denied the thing it needs to function, and she was under a blanket. But her hand was outside the blanket, and that was what Martha held onto her hand. The shape of it, still Grace's hand, still with the particular way the fingers curved. Still with the small scar on the index finger from a kitchen accident in Woodside when she was 17. Grace turned her head. Their eyes met. Her face opened. That was the only word Martha had for it. It opened. The way a window opens. The way a room opens when someone finally turns on the light. After a long time in the dark, and even under the blanket, even at 84 pounds. Even with whatever they had been giving her for 6 months, Grace Sullivan Sterling looked at her mother and her face opened. Martha walked forward. She held her daughter's hand. The hand felt like a bird's wing, light and small and trembling with a current that Martha hoped was simply cold, though she suspected it was more than cold. "Mom," Grace said. It was the most complete sentence she had managed in 6 months. "I know," Martha said. "I know, baby. I'm here." The EMTs were working around them. Martha did not let go of the hand. Behind them, from inside the estate, there was noise, voices, the clipped professional language of law enforcement. And then Eleanor Sterling's voice, elevated for the first time Martha had ever heard it elevated, the smooth surface broken, the instrument misfiring. "I am a woman of faith. I am a founder of..." Her voice stopped briefly. Started again, now with the quality of a prepared statement. "I've devoted my life to healing. Whatever you believe you found in that building, I can explain." A uniformed officer appeared behind Eleanor, and Eleanor turned with the particular motion of a woman who was accustomed to turning and finding a space cleared for her. And this time the space was not cleared in the way she expected. Sarah Miller walked past Martha and toward Eleanor, and she was holding a tablet. The house tablet, bagged as evidence, and she held it up in front of Eleanor's face, The medical log opened on the screen, and said, flatly and finally, Patient G. Day 12. Weight 38 kilos. Eleanor looked at the screen. She looked at it for a long time. Today, Martha said, and she had not planned to speak, but the words were there and they were clear and they were the truest thing she had said in 2 months. Today. The law wrote in ink what my heart had been screaming in silence. She said it to the gathered press, who had arrived with the scanner alert efficiency of people who monitor police frequencies, who were at the gate now with their cameras and their microphones, who had, 8 weeks ago, watched a woman in a navy dress be escorted out of a ballroom while the crowd laughed. Eleanor Sterling was led toward a waiting vehicle by 2 officers. She was praying, or performing prayer, her lips moving, her eyes lowered, the posture of a woman who had spent 64 years constructing herself as the victim of the stories she was actually the author of. The handcuffs went on. Martha watched and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing that has taken too long arriving, not clean, not simple, but real. Not like a prayer, not like a performance, like a fact. Julian was arrested on the far side of the property, at what appeared to be an attempted exit through the rear service road. Martha heard this from Sarah, later, and said nothing. In the coming days, the press would begin pulling at the threads of the Pure Light Foundation, the financial records, the other women who had passed through its programs, the medical licenses of the practitioners Eleanor had employed, the offshore accounts that the organization used to fund treatments that bore no resemblance to the healing mission on the foundation's tax documents. The threads would pull for months. But that was later. Now was the driveway, and the gurney, and Grace's hand in her hand, and the cold evening air of Connecticut. Moving through the iron gates that were finally, thoroughly, open. It's over, Eleanor, Martha said, to the back of the cashmere coat moving toward the police vehicle. She said it quietly, almost gently, the way you say something true when the saying of it is mainly for yourself. The light is finally on. She turned back to her daughter. Grace's eyes were closed. She was breathing. The EMTs were ready to move. I've got you, Martha said, and she walked beside the gurney all the way to the ambulance, her daughter's hand in hers, and she did not let go. The rehab center was in Amagansett, on the eastern edge of Long Island, where the land ran out into the Atlantic and the light in late spring came off the water at a low, particular angle that made everything look slightly more itself, cleaner lines, deeper colors. The world rendered in higher resolution by the quality of the air. It had been 6 months. Grace was in a room on the second floor with a window that faced east, and Martha arrived every Sunday with a blue insulated bag packed in her queen's kitchen stew. Usually, the kind she made with whatever was freshest at the market, thick and rich and built for recovery. Sometimes the banchan, the braised potatoes, the spinach, the pink radish, the small dishes she had kept making all through the worst of it. The ones she'd had to stop herself from throwing away during the weeks when she thought she might not ever be able to bring them anywhere. Today was early May. The drive from Queens had taken an hour 40 in light Sunday traffic, and Martha had made the stew with a new cut of beef she'd found at the Korean market on Northern Boulevard, and it smelled, in the car, like something dependable and real. Grace was sitting up in the chair by the window when Martha arrived. This was new 2 months ago. She had still been mostly in bed 6 weeks ago. She had been able to sit in the chair for an hour before fatigue returned her to horizontal. Today she was sitting up, and she was wearing her own clothes, jeans, a worn flannel shirt that Martha recognized from Grace's apartment in Astoria, from the life before, and her color was coming back. Not all the way, but measurably. The way things come back when you give them what they need and time and quiet, slowly, in stages, and then one day more than you expected. You made the stew, Grace said. Her voice was fuller than it had been. Still careful sometimes, still finding its way back to its original register, but fuller. I made the stew. Martha set the bag on the table and started unpacking. I also made the radish. I know you said it was too much, but I didn't say it was too much. Grace reached for a container. I said you didn't have to, which is different. In my experience, you didn't have to means, please keep doing this. Grace opened the container and looked at the pink radish, and something moved across her face. Something complicated and layered that Martha recognized as the particular expression of a person returning to themselves through something ordinary, through a thing that holds 100 ordinary memories inside it, and finding it both painful and exactly right. "Sit down, Mom." Martha sat. They ate together in the room with the east-facing window. Outside, the Atlantic was doing what the Atlantic does in early May, moving gray-green and relentless toward the shore, indifferent to everything except itself. Which was, Martha had decided over the last 6 months, not a bad quality to aspire to. Grace had been working with a therapist since the second week of her admission. Martha had met the therapist twice, a careful, quiet woman named Drive Reyes, who had said, in their first meeting, "Grace is one of the most resilient people I have worked with. What was done to her was systematic and sustained, and she survived it, and the survival itself tells you something about who she is." Martha had not cried in that meeting, but she had done something adjacent to crying that Dr. Reyes had the professionalism to ignore. Eleanor Sterling had been charged with false imprisonment, criminal endangerment, fraud, and identity theft. The federal Medicare fraud charges had been filed separately. Julian had cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge and would serve 18 months. A fact that Martha had expressed exactly once to Sarah Miller, in brief and specific language, and then set aside. The Pure Light Foundation had been dissolved. 3 other women who had passed through its programs had come forward in the months following the raid. Martha had sold the laundromat in February. She had done it without the anguish she'd expected. The machines, the linoleum crack, the broken A in the neon sign, the folding table where she'd stood for 30 years. She had handed the keys to the new owner, a young woman named Kim, who planned to modernize and expand, and she had felt something that was adjacent to relief. The laundromat had been the place she'd survived in. She did not need to keep surviving in it. With the proceeds and with Sarah Miller's help navigating the legal reversal of the reverse mortgage, Julian had cooperated on that, too, providing testimony that confirmed the instrument had been structured deceptively, which had allowed Martha's lawyer to challenge the terms she had kept the apartment. And she had started the paperwork for something she had been thinking about since the night. She sat in her kitchen with the legal pad and the Banchin and Grace's note. The foundation was called, simply, Sullivan House. Not a legal name yet, still in the formation process, still working through the nonprofit filing, still finding its shape. But the purpose was clear: support for families navigating the particular wall that Martha had run into over and over in the last year. The wall that went up between ordinary people and the legal and financial systems when those systems were being used against them by people with enough money to weaponize them. Legal referrals, financial counseling, a place to bring a manila envelope full of documents when you didn't know what to do with them. There were more people than she had realized who had manila envelopes. That was the thing she had learned. They were everywhere: in Queens, in the Bronx, in the places where the gates were closed and the lawyers were expensive. And the other side always had more time. "Tell me about the foundation," Grace said, which she said most Sundays now, with the particular appetite of a person relearning how to be interested in the world. Martha told her the name, the structure. The first referral she'd handled last week: a woman in Woodside, whose son-in-law had been routing her Social Security payments into a joint account without her knowledge. The small, specific business of keeping other people from losing things they didn't know were being taken. Grace listened. Her spoon moved in the stew. The window held the sea light. "You're good at this," Grace said. "You've always been good at it. The seeing through things part. I wasn't good at it for a while there. You found my note. I almost didn't find your note. But you did," Grace said, simply, in the tone of someone who has decided that the thing that happened is the thing that counts. Outside, the light was shifting, the mid-morning Atlantic light moving through its careful progressions. The world arranging itself in the particular order of a Sunday in May. The water was always moving. The shore was always there to receive it. Martha thought about what she would say later, when she drove back to Queens through the tunnel, when she sat down at the kitchen table. With the legal pad and whatever was next, she thought about the line she'd been working on for the closing of the Sullivan House mission statement, a sentence to put at the top of the document. The sentence that would tell people what the place was for. She looked at her daughter eating stew by the east-facing window. The color in her face. The flannel shirt from the real life. The real Grace life, the one that had existed before. Starting over isn't failure. She had thought it, had said it once, to the press, in the parking lot outside the Sterling estate, and then again to her lawyer. And then again to herself in the dark at 2 a.m. on the nights when the dark required it. She had been saying it long enough now that it had become not a consolation, but a fact, the kind of fact you arrive at through enough repetition that it loses its quality of needing to be believed and simply becomes known. "I like the radish," Grace said. "I know you do, Mom." "Yeah." Grace set down her spoon and looked at her mother in the direct, clear way she'd been relearning for 6 months. The look that had been behind the veil and behind the managed voice, and behind all of it the look that was simply Grace, simply her daughter, not performed or arranged or depleted. "Thank you," Grace said, "for not stopping." Martha looked back. The sun off the water came through the window at a low angle, settling across the room with the even quality of light that has traveled a long way and arrived exactly where it meant to be. "You hid that note in gold tissue paper," Martha said, "because you knew I'd keep the bag." Grace's mouth moved. "You know me," Martha said. "I know you. That's the whole story." Outside, a gull crossed the window. The Atlantic kept moving. Somewhere in Queens, in the wire rack beside a register that now belonged to someone else, there was probably already an envelope that needed opening, a document that needed reading, a woman who needed to know what she was holding. At 62, Martha Sullivan had learned that starting over wasn't failure. She had learned that the gates that were built to stop you were also telling you, with their cold iron logic, exactly what was worth fighting through them for. She passed her daughter the container of pink radish. The silence, for the first time in years, was actually peaceful. "Friends, how did you find today's story? I've been sitting with Martha Sullivan's journey since we began, and there's something I keep coming back to, not the courtroom victory, not the handcuffs on Eleanor Sterling, though those moments were earned and real. It's that blue insulated bag on a Sunday morning. It's the bench Martha kept making all through the worst of it, for a daughter she didn't know if she'd ever get to feed again. That's the heart of this story, not the legal triumph, the stew. Martha did everything wrong by the rules of the world she was operating in. She didn't have a lawyer. She didn't have money. She had a penalty notice, a discarded pill organizer, a note hidden in gold tissue paper, and 30 years of knowing how to see past the surface of things to what was actually happening in the back of the house. And she won, not because she was more powerful, because she was more honest with herself, about what she had missed, about what she should have seen at the wedding, and at the kitchen counter and at the gate. That 2 a.m. reckoning in the dark, when she let herself remember the locked dining room door and the pretty wellness bottles and said I handed her the keys to her own cage. That's not failure. That's the beginning of the kind of clarity you cannot buy and cannot perform. We live in a world that has a lot of Eleanor Sterlings in it. People who build gates and file papers and use the weight of institutional systems to make ordinary people feel small and confused and wrong. Martha Sullivan's answer to all of that was a penlight, a laundry chute, and a prep phone with one number saved in it. There's something in that for all of us, regardless of our age, our circumstances, the kind of gates we're standing in front of. The gates don't tell you what's worth fighting for, but they do tell you. You just have to be willing to listen to what your gut has been saying all along. I hope Martha's story brought you something today, a reminder that love is not passive, that the ordinary skills of an ordinary life are sometimes exactly the tools the moment requires, and that starting over is not an ending but a beginning with the benefit of everything you've learned. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. Your voice makes this community what it is. And friends, if you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit that like button. More stories like Martha's are coming. You won't want to miss them. Take care of yourselves, and look for the notes hidden in the gold tissue paper. They're there.